get started. We are excited to talk about the topic today, which is how Revit data is powering better projects. And everyone knows Guardian is a very proactive tool, but data is a big part of what we do and what we strive to do. So today we're going to be focusing on Backstage. And just keep in mind that a lot of this is, one vehicle for how we see the data being brought to you in the most effective way. Backstage has always been about being behind the scenes. It's about your data, however you would like it to be. So, it's available for you to distribute however you would like, merge with other data sources, things like that. So we'll kind of hint about other parts of data that we bring to you in other ways and things that we're working on today. But yeah, that's what we're talking about today. I'm Parley Burnett, founder of Guardian, and I'm joined with Josh. We're going to be talking about the data today. And yeah, we just would like to, on the next slide, talk about kind of our program, how we run these. We like, again, to kind of keep things interactive. So the mics can be opened up. That's something we would like to see. If you have a burning question today, just raise your hand and we'll try to get to you. But we do have a fair amount of slides to get through quickly, but we'll get through some slides today. If we are running short on time, we'll try to get to you at the end. And we are watching the chat. We always like to make these a team event, so we have other members of our team on the call watching the chat and the Q&A. So whatever your questions might be, this is a good chance to interact with us. And yeah, we're just we are recording this. We'll share the recording with you afterwards, as well as on our website. So for housekeeping, I think that might be about it, right, Josh? How'd I do?
I think you did
Anything?
Great.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, I'll talk about the agenda and then I'll pass it back over to you to talk about some of the latest updates before we dive in here. Yeah, on the agenda for today, we're kind of structured this in a way that starts with kind of ways that we're seeing firms use the Guardian data proactively. Like Parley mentioned, there's a lot that we do. I'm sure most of the people on this call are using Guardian today, but I must mention, like, we do automations for work sets and standards. We do proactive, like, real-time training. Today we're just focusing on the data side of the tools, but the idea with the data that we provide, whether it's through weekly reports, Project Central, or the dashboard, which will be the majority of the conversation, all of that, there's proactive tools within Guardian to kind of get ahead. And that's really our mission, is to help you be proactive, help you keep things out of the data, and have really good reports to share with your team and leadership. But we'll talk through each of these. We'll start with we're going to be structuring this based on use case as we go through this today. So we may revisit a couple of the pages that y'all are familiar with in the dashboard, but we'll be looking at those pages from some different perspectives from time to time. So starting with kind of model health and catching problems early, way of staying out ahead of things. We'll move into kind of ways that you can use the data to understand where your team might need training, and how you can kind of improve the overall team's kind of Revit capabilities. So from a team performance, then from an individual kind of performance review. Then we'll talk about the ROI, being able to show your teams like how you're getting ahead of things, pitfalls you're avoiding, and some ROI numbers with the data that we provide. And then getting into numbers 5 and 6 here, we'll kind of look at more of the reactive, right? Being able to quickly troubleshoot, quickly see what's going on in projects without having to even open them. And maybe building out your content libraries and building out some more automations using the data. And then we'll wrap up, like I said, with some announcements as far as what's coming next from Guardian. I will mention one thing quickly. I saw that in the chat from Steve, just about integrating data. That is our approach here, is that we give you access to a dashboard, and we host the SQL database and give you the credentials to easily plug these credentials in and see your own data without having to know how to put it all together. But it is your data. We very much believe in that. You have access to the raw data, So we do see a lot of firms kind of integrating this with other data sources, pulling other things into Power BI and creating custom pages. So happy to talk more about that with you, Steve.
Yeah, I think knowing Steve, you've probably got some ideas behind that question that I would love to hear at some point in more detail there, Steve. So appreciate that. Perfect. Yeah, so we thought just before we jump into some of the meat of that, we would just cover a quick update here. And this was actually pushed out recently through a new Power BI template, as well as a little bit of update to the pipeline. We've had some requests from folks about, like, not only can you tell me like who has Guardian installed on the machine, but I'd like to understand at the machine level, like what the machine username is, what the Windows profile name is, and things like that. So we've actually, to kind of nerd out just really quick, before we had this as separate tables that were not really related to the rest of the data in Backstage. And so what we've done here is, of course, we've added computer name and computer profile to this, but it's also part of the same like data sets, basically getting pulled from the Revit sessions data that we've been capturing for some time now. So what that really means is a more cohesive experience that lines up with, I think, what you're looking for. You're able to see, okay, what desktop connector versions does everyone have? What Guardian versions does everyone have on the installs page, which we weren't able to do before. And what this also allows you to do is like merge this data together with your own, or make those logical connections, because just the Revit username alone before didn't really do that very well. So excited for that. Caitlin's asking, can you show the Revit specific Revit version and build? Yes, we do show that. That is on another page, but yes, we can show it. No, that's it right there, actually. Yeah, if you click Revit version, it's showing it in that matrix.
It does show up on several other pages as well, depending on kind of what you're looking for. But this is one place. All right. Anything else on updates before we move on to model health?
No, just some minor issues were cleaned up as well in that new template. So if you go to our website and download that, you'll get it. Okay.
Yeah, one thing that we will get into a little bit later that was a recent update is just more ability to see crash data, right? So not just on the sinks page, but on the sessions page, being able to quickly filter to crash instances and see that. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. But yeah, talking a little bit about model health. I've had some really good conversations with firms over the past, this kind of most recent version of this dashboard, I think we launched in late February this year. So it's been really fun. As I think many of you know, obviously I've been on the phone with many of you, whether you're evaluating Guardian and testing it out for the first time, or we're looking at some of this data around like renewal time or at any time in between. So it's been really fun for me to be on these calls. Those are some of my favorite calls. And yeah, look forward to sharing some of the ways that I'm seeing firms use this right now, specifically focused on model health. So this projects page, I often see as like a launch point, a starting point for seeing, like, first of all, just projects that are registered. Where are people even working on projects from? Just this morning, I had a light bulb moment come on for a firm we were talking to. They didn't realize people were still working on projects in Revit 22. So being able to click on these slices of the pie, quickly filter these things down. Specifically, those two pie charts up on the top left tend to be really popular. Project locations, right? Making sure people are not accidentally saving things locally and working on them from there. It's a very common use case as well. And if that's not your best practice, there's always that proactive component in Guardian, so you can build out rules to maybe guide or prevent people from working on things from unapproved locations. And then down below, you'll have all your active projects, right, listed out. So some of the common kind of or popular columns that I see firms focusing on would be like just monitoring the size of everything that people are working on, right? Our project's starting to get too large. Should we maybe dive in on some of these other pages if we're noticing that file size increase? Sorting by last saved date, just to show what people are working on most recently. And then these kind of columns here on the right, looking at warnings, right? Always pretty eye-opening, tends to be like realizing for some people like how many warnings are currently in their projects and specific projects, of course. And we'll dive in, of course, on future pages into the warning details and all of that's fun stuff. Active hours is another thing that's new for us, basically tracking if the model's open and if that's their active window, right? We count that as active time versus if they have 3 projects open, right? Only one of them would be marked as active. A lot of leadership teams that I've talked to tend to like this just to get a better idea and have another data point for like for bids and quotes, right? How much should we be anticipating for a job like this going forward? And then average time to open and average time to sync. Again, just making sure things are trending in the right direction. We have people, somebody came to us a couple of weeks ago because they recently found out the model was taking 45 minutes to open, and it had been like that for several weeks. So they were looking for a solution. So when I talk to firms, it's more about the proactive side of that, especially talking about model health, right? Being able to catch that when it starts to be 10 minutes, 15 minutes, or something along those lines. Same with time to sync. But we'll jump in. So a lot of firms, again, are using this as kind of a launch point. We'll dive into some more details here. But before I move along, Parley, anything you'd mention on this projects page?
Just kind of in line with what you said about the Revit version, I think a lot of firms are really standardizing around Autodesk Docs, ACC. And, we talked with a lot of firms that have concerns about locally saved files that have been downloaded and then work is being performed locally. So I view that as kind of a consideration here. It's very easy to filter down to those C:// projects and see who and what might be going on there. Model health, of course, is a buzzword. It can mean a lot of things to different people, and we think about it in terms of process and things like that as well, not just what's in the model.
As far as maintaining a healthy model, this page, project overview, has been designed specifically to help you get a kind of a closer look at the projects themselves. So you'll see up at the top, we have these project group and model filters that are commonly used on this page. And when you're using those, you can start to see some high level information, like how many users have been working in this file, right? Number of warnings generated, the file size, things like that. So it's just making sure that your team is on the right version of Revit and desktop connector. Talk to a lot of BIM managers and project leads who don't really have this type of insight. It goes to IT as a request, might come back as like completed, but kind of the actual visibility and insight is not there. So we wanted to make sure that we could provide that to the teams. And then being able to look at specific users, right? Start to understand if there's maybe trends, things heading in the wrong direction, right? People that stand out as far as creating more warnings than others. Maybe someone on your team who's working remote and is working off Wi-Fi, right? Just being able to make sure that they have a good connection, they have a good machine, their time to open and time to sync, as well as time between syncs. Everything's like moving in stride with your standards and what you would expect from the project.
Josh, just real quick, that page is brand new to this new version of the dashboard. And the feedback was definitely, can you give us kind of a centralized project view for my files and teams, right? Can we have a page that we can just get a single snapshot and send to our teams? So this is really what that was created to do. and it closely corresponds with the Project Central from within Revit.
Yeah, thanks, Barley. Yeah, I'll mention too, I didn't highlight, but on the left side, being able to track like open and sync times, file size, and kind of through some line and bar graphs as well. Watch how that's progressing. And the ability to easily toggle this between different models or different projects to compare and contrast against different teams, different regions, whatever the case may be at your team. Looking at sync data, this is also a new page as of earlier this year. Again, the ability to focus on specific projects or models here, but all focusing on sync data. So, as far as model health goes, being able to make sure, like, right, in this case, this firm's using Guardian's sync traffic control to make sure that when a conflict happens, the users are instead added to a queuing system. So we're preventing, in this case, every single conflict for them, avoiding 833 conflicts that would have happened otherwise. So being able to stay out ahead of things like that, if you're new to Guardian or not using that feature yet, this might look like the inverse. Reach out to us if you need any help getting that particular feature turned on to start to get ahead of those things. But also being able to make sure your team has good habits, right? Average time between syncs, the average sync duration, right? Talk to a lot of teams who want their users to sync at least every 2 hours, if not every 90 minutes or every hour. So being able to track things like that and get ahead of potential bad habits. Again, on a call with the firm yesterday, it was really cool to see a chart that looked similar to this in the sense that they have teams around the world that are working together on projects. So really cool to be able to show like this project is essentially never sleeping. People are constantly working in this model 24 hours a day, in this case, even 7 days a week. But being able to see this kind of fun heat map, when are people most active in the project? And then other types of data, right? Is this model being compacted as frequently as we would like? We have tools, again, to help automate some of that. So every 50 syncs across the model, for example, you can have that automatically compact for the next user that goes to sync. Being able to make sure that that's spread out across the team, staying on top of crashes, in this case, being kind of proactive about it, not having to rely on people coming to you, but being able to reach out to people if you're seeing some crashes. And then again, monitoring average time to sync and time between syncs here. Parley, anything you'd add before we dive more into the crash example specifically?
Not really, but I want to answer this question from Steve. He's asking if the process, if the sync times are handled across different time zones and how that's displayed here. And really, in the data, all of the sync activity is captured using like the same UTC time zone, basically. So and then the adjustment for each of those syncs is done locally in this desktop version of Power BI. So if you generate the dashboard here in Power BI desktop, it is adjusted. So truly at 6 a.m. Josh's time, because he's the one that did these screenshots. Monday at 6 a.m. there were 195 individuals who synced during that time slot, no matter where they were in the world, right, in their time. So hopefully that answers your question, Steve. There is some issues with published versions of the dashboard. Published Power BI does not handle these time zone adjustments itself. And so we're recommending that you kind of do a little bit of extra customization there to kind of get the time zone that you would like those to show up in.
I'll dive a little bit deeper into the crash reporting here. So we've got these buttons up in the top right, and if you're using the desktop app, it's worth noting that you want to hit Control before you hit that crashed button. It is like an editing version of Power BI, so you hit Control first, and that's how you can filter down the page, just in case anyone's following along with their own version right now. But in this case, it's filtering down the whole page to just crash instances, specifically crashes that happened during syncs. You can always focus on a particular project or model. You can see if there's maybe something that jumps out as far as trying to get ahead of things right earlier this week, or in this case for some people it was an hour ago today, 3 p.m. on Wednesday. Right, maybe we had some big incident, right? What's jumping out at us? Being able to see the different users that felt that impact, as well as kind of start to understand some trends, right? Is there a correlation between the average time between syncs and the crashes, right? Maybe people are leaving the model open for 2 days at a time and then they're experiencing a crash, right? Is it that, or is it something's wrong with the model and we need to dig a little deeper? And then just looking at the entire history down here, depending on how you're kind of filtering this page.
I just want to echo something that Moses in the chat mentioned. He's saying that the open and sync times are really what he's looking at the most for what constitutes a good, healthy performing model. And I think that's really important. I've seen that and heard that from so many client calls. There definitely are things in the models that can affect the health of a model, but really this is where it's at. So it's exciting.
That's awesome, Moses. All right. So sticking on kind of crashes, but jumping over to the sessions page. If you haven't downloaded the latest version of our template, you might not have this button up in the top right just yet, but you can find that on our downloads page. So this is doing the same thing, except now we're looking at session data rather than sync data. So kind of sticking with that example that I was just giving, right? You can see there's definitely a trend for this particular team on this particular project, right? People are leaving the model open for several days at a time, and that's resulting in a crash. And then again, on the right, just being able to have more data points, in this case, kind of in the center, right? Being able to see specifically in people leaving the model open for 67 hours, 36 hours, 34 hours, definitely not best practice, things that a lot of teams are trying to talk to an individual about if that's a regular recurring thing, but also explaining, right, that can have impacts on the rest of the team and the overall project as well. And then being able to do some more detective work, look at this particular sessions, see if there may be any correlation between somebody having an outdated desktop connector or Revit version that may be causing the crash. And then this hours lost column is a newer one as well. This page as a whole came out in late February, earlier this year. But this hours lost is a new data point, and it's really what it is we're calculating from the last time that the users opened or synchronized the model, how much time is between that and when the model crashed. So I find talking with firms that a lot of times this number gets really high, and it's because someone did a bunch of work and then left the model open for several days and then it crashed. But it can be a really good indicator if you're finding somebody who was just doing 3 or 4 hours of work and then it crashed. Right? It can be a great kind of ROI point, which we'll talk about a little bit later, in terms of being able to get ahead of these things and how much work loss you can prevent, or you can prevent, by preventing sync conflicts and whatever else it may be that's causing these crashes. And then taking a step back, looking at the sessions page without that filter on it, you're able to see things like average active time in the projects, average session duration, maybe sessions worked over the weekend, and coming about model health, just making sure the team's working during the work week, maybe understanding who feels the need or needs to be working on the weekend and why that might be. And then seeing across the team, right? In this case, we've got a lot of people working in the project. We've got most people with really good habits. Those light blue sessions that are kind of shorter indicate like healthy sessions where there was a registered open and close. The dark blue indicate that was a crash that had happened. So again, seeing there's usually a correlation between leaving the model open for several days and a crash.
That's new. That's new in this new version too, the color coding.
Oh yeah. Good point. Thanks, Billy. And then just as far as kind of navigation, how to use this page, on the bottom left, we're looking at Revit sessions. So we track those separate from model sessions. So you can use this table on the bottom left to see when the Revit session itself was opened and began and ended. And then you can see the individual model sessions on the right. So in this case, if you were selecting on a session that had a Revit session that had multiple model sessions in it, you could use this left table to filter down the right table to see exactly what the users were working on during that particular Revit session. Harley, anything you'd add on the sessions page?
No, I just think there's a lot of value to this. From a lot of this is kind of exported and brought to IT. Sometimes this and the sync information, especially the open times, you know, a lot of solid arguments can be made for better performing hardware. And in that is also kind of an inherited ROI. It's kind of fun to watch and hear about people using this.
Thanks. Cool. I've just a couple more on model health here, and then we'll transition to some of the user training. We're talking about model health. Of course, we got to talk about the warnings. And one of the newer pages here is the warning snapshot. So being able to see, in this case, warnings by model. So all your models listed out on the left, and filter down this page by clicking on particular models to see which warnings are currently in that project, right? And then the rest of the tables here would kind of assist in that kind of investigative work that you're doing, like what are the failing elements, right? What additional elements were affected, and determining, you know, how severe are these warnings, which ones might we prioritize as high, medium, or low. It's a setting control that you have in Guardian, and what might we want to you know, start to try and fix here.
A question was asked in the chat about, you know, are resolved warnings tracked by Guardian? You know, a few slides before we showed, you know, users, how many warnings a user has created. And that is basically a log. So we're keeping track of the moment such and such user creates a warning. That's a logged event. And so the totals shown there are just kind of aggregates over time. It's not a reflection of like how many warnings are still to be resolved, right? Because some of that might have been cleaned up already. So that's not really how we would suggest looking at those numbers, but the warning snapshot is basically the last captured state of warnings in that model. So using the kind of combination of those two types of data, you could kind of understand what needs to be resolved still.
Yeah, it's a good clarification. And on the projects page where we were just looking at our registered projects at the beginning of this, that number is the same number that would show up here on warning snapshot. So that's saying current warnings in the project. Down at the bottom of my screen, just left of the warning snapshots page, you see warnings all and warnings detail. Those two pages will focus like all warnings kind of created. So great for like training purposes, those two pages particularly. As far as family loading and model health goes, right, just being able to monitor where people are getting the content that's coming into your projects, seeing the types of transactions that people are using. Are people going to your approved libraries, or are they getting it from the, you know, the downloads folder? Is that where it's coming from? Being able to track specifically the number of families that have been loaded in and the number of properties that were introduced to the project through those transactions. Ideally keeping these ratios closer to each other than some of these that you see here where it's one family and 418 new properties introduced. And a lot of times a correlation between somebody downloading something from, you name it, any Revit City or manufacturer content and bringing that in that way versus going through the approved library. I think this is the last page that I'll talk about before handing it over to you, Parley. But from a model health perspective, looking at the commands all page, um, really just being able to kind of focus on trends in the project. You can see the nice line graph on the top showing trends as far as command usage, and also the bar graph below, very commonly used just to see like high level what's happening in this project, or maybe too many people accessing the manage links dialog, too many people playing around with the location settings, right? And by clicking on any of those in the bar graph or the line chart, it would filter down the top of this page to show you exactly who's accessing those things, and maybe some opportunities to try and get ahead or curb some behavior there. And then the ability to see canceled versus processed commands. We'll talk a little bit more about this in the training section, but being able to see how effective some of your trainings have been, as well as capture comments from the users, right? Some of these protections you might have put in place to steer people in different directions, or maybe ask people to load content from your approved library. So this is one place that you can see when people are bringing in content from other sources, for example, are they requesting that this be added to our approved library? Harley, anything you'd add on kind of the model health use case overall before we transition to Revit training, how to use this for that?
I would just say it's been fun watching the chat, and that we are not done with this kind of theme of model health, right? There's lots we have planned in that direction. So all the feedback here and questions are helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll have to catch up on the chat later. But yeah, I'd definitely be curious just from the group overall, just how helpful these dashboards are, how you're using them today. I know a lot of times when I talk with firms, this is a lot more insight than they've had previously. But I'd be curious to learn more.
It is, yeah, kind of unique too, right? Like, yeah, cool. All right, so we'll get into this next topic of training. I'm kind of curious, and, you don't have to answer in the chat or anything, but when you think of training, Revit training, what comes to mind? For me, it's stuff I've done in the past is just kind of people in a room or on a call, sharing screens out, showing them how to do stuff. And we're going to talk about that a little bit, but there's also another very different flavor when it comes to Guardian, which is a much more proactive side. So we're going to start with kind of that scalability concept, where we're able to basically nudge users in the right direction in the moment they're doing something. And that can be very effective too. I think another question would be like, when you think about how much time you spend towards better models, Josh is talking about model health, right? How much of your time is spent on the models versus the system that basically promotes healthy models? And I think a lot of us would say, the systems, but so much comes up in our day-to-day that kind of pulls us off of that track, right? We get pulled into the fire drill of a project that's having issues, and those are very time consuming. So this whole idea of like getting in front of the issue so that those things don't happen can go a long way. So let's go to the next slide. We're going to look at the user commands page again, commands all, sorry. And this is basically that like place you can come to triage and kind of capture the bigger picture of what's been going on and who and in which projects. And, one thought I had preparing for this too is like, think about like your distribution for this data. I'm always very interested to hear how firms are choosing to distribute this. And folks that have a fair amount of like project level admins, they're taking copies of this and basically kind of pre-filtering down to certain project groups or model groups. And that makes this whole dashboard much more digestible for smaller teams, which is great. I think that's really great. Maybe a project-based kind of report can be generated quickly from this. But looking at it from like a company admin's perspective, there's a lot of commands that like when we look at what Guardian can kind of gently nudge users towards, there's a lot. There's over 100 things to choose from. And, print, that might not be your initial focus when you first get started with Guardian, right? You have bigger fish to fry, exploding CAD maybe. So one suggestion would be to you can customize your own dashboard, and maybe with that top commands kind of pre-filter on top of what we're doing here. This is only showing the top 10 commands based on how frequent things are being done. That's why you see print show up there. But if you want to focus on explode CAD, model in place, and loading families, right? You can definitely just filter that down and make much more focus out of it across the board. So yeah, looking at the canceled versus processed, we always like to look at these lighter blue bars as kind of a measure of effectiveness of your training at scale with your users. The sync reminders, people are seemingly responding to that and syncing when they're reminded, which is great. But maybe for that override graphics by element command, maybe we need a little bit more bite to the message that we've programmed into our Guardian settings, right? And from a bigger perspective, we've kind of aggregated that into the pie chart. Anything that is set to guide or prevent is broken down in this pie chart by if it was canceled or processed. Did they click the cancel button or did they enter continue? And so when I look at this chart, I see a little bit of cautiousness with how those settings are being used compared to other accounts where we see that light blue pie slice more in the 1/4 or even more range. So just a little perspective there. Okay. At the top right, you can filter this down by user. And then below that, you can filter that down by model. So again, you can just really drill down closely to see, is this a firm-wide thing that we need to address with a Guardian setting? Or is this more of a user type of approach, custom approach, which we'll talk about in a minute. Let's go to the next.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Matthew had a comment. Revit training is my biggest challenge, figuring out what people actually need to learn. I feel like this page is where I see a lot of people go for that, just understanding how widespread are some of these things.
Perfect. Yeah. So we're just going to kind of cruise through a few slides here showing different ways of drilling this down further. At the top right, that command slicer, it's called, the menu there, you can choose one or several different commands if you hold control, and that might get you down to those that you're more focused on. And it just really kind of makes it easier to see those trends. And here we see that blue slice kind of open up wider, which is nice to see, right? Because this might be what we're more concerned about. And then, hiding elements in view. There's a lot that Guardian ships with that's defaulting to monitor. And that's helpful. I think there's a lot of good data behind this. That's our next slide. But we really want to identify those things that are happening without any kind of intervention, and then allow you through the data to kind of have a justification for doing something about it. So when we look at this, we're looking at hiding elements in view. If you go back just that rule name there, this is actually new in our 3 series of this dashboard where we are showing the rule name. And we ship with a rule called 2D category. So this is only hiding elements in view where users have hidden 2D categories in their views, which it's what you might as well delete it because otherwise those things are just kind of bogging the model down further. And we see thousands of this happening. So it's a very easy low-hanging fruit thing for you to do something about. Anything you would add here, Josh?
No, I'm just keeping an eye on the clock, honestly, and realizing we have a lot to cover still in 15 minutes or so.
Okay.
But nothing I'd add on this one.
Okay. this is great, gives you that extra level of detail. So for any command that you are logging with Guardian, you can filter down and kind of see what elements were selected at that time. And then for different kinds of things like our delete protection, you can see what things were deleted as a result of that. So kind of two directions here with that. You can basically kind of at scale look at everything that's being hidden, maybe, in case there's a change you need to make to your view templates. Or on the flip side, like what happened, you know, to something, helps you to triage that.
Yeah, and that focus mode that's highlighted there, in case any of y'all don't know about that, it's a great way to kind of just expand this and see exactly what people are hiding or what's being deleted in some of these actions. As examples.
Perfect. Yep. Okay, from a training standpoint, when we look at family loading, this is a tough thing to influence without any kind of proactive tool. You know, I've fought those battles before, and you know, spent tons of time creating a great library, and users just kind of fall back to those habits. Our purpose with this page is to basically show you the larger trend and hopefully steer you towards the Guardian feature where you can influence those actions. We'll show you a screenshot on another slide, that family loading feature in Guardian. And here we're able to show you those paths where things are being loaded from. So again, those larger trends. Do we have a lot of people loading from our desktop and download folders? And yeah, let's move on. This is our sinks page. We've looked at this already, but again, for those larger trends, being able to see, okay, we've got 2-hour average between sinks, maybe not as much of an issue here. But if that's like much more than that at scale, then we would probably steer you towards the sync traffic control aspect of Guardian. And certainly you're able to see, like on an individual basis, those users who are not syncing very often, and customize your training for those. And sessions, yeah, basically, again, just equipping you with some footing and foundation. So when you go to your users asking them to close the models down, this is going to give you that data to do that.
Yeah, I talked to a lot of teams.
Josh?
I talked to a lot of teams. You know, every day, like closing the model seems to be like golden standard, golden rule number one there. But even teams that are trying to get their users to close the model before they leave for lunch. So just the ability here to kind of see how effective that is, who the outliers are, and where you can focus some of your efforts. That's how I see firms using this one.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, so individual performance, a few things on this one. First, generally, I would just say and give a recommendation that with this data, there's a lot of responsibility and it can be wielded in different ways. I always love to hear of firms using it for like lifting up users. In fact, praising the ones that you see healthy behaviors from, and not necessarily the flip side of that and just chasing after people who are, doing things kind of in a messy way. That can really go a long way towards building a better culture at your firm. So keep that in mind, maybe change the sort arrows and things like that, just to remind you to kind of be very regular about your praise to those other users. Warnings on this page, on an individual basis, I think we're very unique in the fact that we capture the warnings created on a per user basis, right? So you are able to really kind of create some users, again, to kind of give that praise to. Okay, you have really great behaviors, or not behaviors, but you have really great ability to kind of avoid creating these warnings, and we appreciate that. This does give you some ability to focus some training efforts on those that create the most warnings. And you'll find that 5% of your users are creating probably most of the warnings. So hopefully it's easy, not a huge lift to address that.
Yeah, I'll just add that we have baked in defaults for like low, medium, and high priority warnings and which warnings we're even tracking. But in your Guardian settings, you have full control over that if you wanted to customize it. And when it comes to individual performance as well, you have the ability to kind of create both of these and share side by side, right? This is maybe how you are doing really well compared to like the team as a whole, to Parley's point about kind of lifting people up.
Yeah, cool. Let's go to the next slide. Sessions, again, kind of touched on this a little bit, but just looking at specific usernames and being able to see, okay, there's a very short average time between syncs. Let's give them, Amazon gift card or something. and you're able to look at other users who might be, not that frequent about their sync times. And then Revit sessions, you can see kind of how long those sessions are staying active on an individual basis. And then on syncs, similar concept, right? We do capture like when they're compacting, and very interesting, we see a lot of times there's like project teams where there's one user that kind of has this habit to compact, but it's not really well distributed. So you could talk to the team and kind of encourage that. There's also an automated feature in Guardian where you can just have it handle that for you. I've seen a lot of users kind of loading families from their desktop and download folders, and this gives you kind of that insight on a per user basis. And then they're loading activity. So just kind of helpful to kind of customize your training efforts with them. Anything you'd add there, Josh?
No, I think the main way that we're seeing firms, like a lot of the firms that I talk to are focused initially on using a lot of this data to like to bring the whole team new trainings and understand where they want to focus their trainings. But we do see firms using it for the individual performance. So that's why we wanted to touch on it today. I think just how we're seeing that is typically, like I said, comparing individuals versus the team as a whole. And we really like to emphasize like focusing on the wins, focusing on the good things that those users are doing, encouraging them to kind of be good leaders. But when it comes to measuring ROI, I'll try and talk through a couple of these slides here, and then we'll close out with Parley. I talked to a lot of firms who are looking to use this data. I talked to a lot of BIM managers who are really excited about what Guardian can do, and they need to convince their team to make the purchase or to do the renewal. Want to get buy-in from everybody else. So we wanted to talk about just how you can kind of constantly report on what Guardian's doing for you, how it's not only like what pitfalls it's avoiding, but how to quantify some of that and how we've seen firms do that. So weekly reports is just one way, right? If you're using Guardian, you get these emails Sunday night, Monday morning. So this can be a great quick way to have the information come directly to you to see some of the wins from the week, right? And maybe some of the things that you could start to get ahead of. So focusing on certain command usage, maybe things that have been canceled versus completed in terms of accidentally unpinning something or deleting the wrong thing, where people are getting their content from this week, and all of the cleanup work that Guardian's doing for you behind the scenes. This is a big one, right? Out of the box, Guardian's purging unused properties, automatically merging duplicates as their families are copied from one project to another. Like, those are things that Guardian just does out of the box, but also your mapping rules that you may have created to teach Guardian, hey, this text shouldn't be in our project, it should be this one. So it's always good to highlight those because they're typically in the tens of thousands in terms of cleanup Guardian's doing on your behalf. And really for the ROI conversation, I think this page is where we'll spend the most of the time here. This is a new page as of earlier this year, and what we've done is onboarded over 300 firms at this point. We talk with them about the wins that they want to tackle early on, and where they're seeing the biggest kind of return on investment. And so we've tried to summarize a lot of those data points into one page for you, so it becomes really easy to show your team. So the red numbers here are how often these things are happening. And the larger black numbers above are showing how many times those have been avoided by certain protections that you might have turned on. So just highlighting sync traffic control and preventing sync conflicts as an example, we give this kind of algorithm that we see a lot of firms using to basically say, if we can assume that we save 1 minute on each conflict that we avoid, so obviously not only is that causing longer sync times for everybody involved, but people aren't working and there's potential corruption that can happen depending on how many people are trying to sync. So if we can assume we saved X amount of time, that equates to so many hours. At the end of the day, that's time that those people could have been working on billable projects. So we're saving this much time by not having this downtime on projects. And the standards automation is just another component to that, right? With Revit, we talk often about how it's death by 1,000 cuts, right? You bring in a bunch of properties, right? You've got literally maybe tens of thousands of things that are duplicated and copied around, cluttering up menus, causing longer times to open, longer times to sync for everybody every single day. So focusing on those wins is important as well. Parley, anything you'd mention on this one?
Not on that one, no.
We've talked about some of these, so I'll kind of breeze through these and for the sake of time, but for commands all, you do have this mode selector up in the very top right, so you can choose like to focus on, for example, things that are just guided or prevented, and start to focus on like how often are we curbing behavior that we're trying to get ahead of, right? So like Parley was talking about with the training, but in this case, focusing more on specifically how effective that's been, and being able for this firm in particular to see, okay, more than half the time we're trying to send someone in a different direction or give them some best practices, they're actually canceling, and it's effective. Project overview is also a good page to showcase some of this data, being able to see, okay, we're staying on top of these version updates, we're doing the right things, we're staying ahead of things by keeping open times and sync times, right, not going the wrong direction, right, by preventing people from copying links around or inserting bloated content, right? Those are the types of things, and this is kind of the result from that effort. Also being able to potentially showcase, like, here's where our average open times and sync times are today, and also and then be at the top being able to expand that date range to show, hey, a year ago, here's what we were seeing, right? We're trending in the right direction on this project. The mappings page is going to show you those kind of properties that I talked about already, right? Which of your mapping rules are being applied? In this case, like on the far right, 32,000 unused properties have been purged. That's Guardian shipped out of the box. That's doing that for you. And that's just the names alone. So that that's by name is what that number is. So it could be 3, 4, 5, 10x that, depending on if people are bringing in the same properties over and over again. Guardian's just keeping those out of your project altogether. And then troubleshooting. Parley, I'm talking through this one. Is that right?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. Double checking. Got one more after troubleshooting, and that one's all yours. So showcasing Project Central as well, right? This is our in Revit dashboard. It's modeless. You can choose to give users access to this data as well, but you can be very prescriptive with which data users can see. For example, allowing users to see who else is in the model with them by using the sync traffic control function. But this would allow you and your team, I talk to people all the time who really like this because you can see this data in Revit without having to open the project. So if somebody calls the Revit hotline and is saying, I can't see all these things, these things, where are they? You can go in there and see if maybe somebody's recently deleted something or what's been going on without even having to open the model. I see, Matthew, there's a Revit hotline. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what I hear.
Where
some people refer to their job as. Yeah. Users at a glance will show you some good information about who's been in the project. And this timeline is just a different way to see some of that session data that we've been highlighting. When it comes to troubleshooting, being able to filter down to a particular model, right? Look at some of this data we've been talking about already. See, is somebody on, a different version of desktop connector, right? Is that maybe the reason that they're having an issue syncing? And then warning snapshots, again, being able to kind of troubleshoot, hey, we want to take a closer look at this particular project or this group of models, right? See what the most common warnings are. And really dig into the details about, number of warnings, which elements are affected, all the above here. I know we're at time, but I think we'll kind of keep going here and probably just go a couple minutes over. Go ahead, Parley, if you're going to say something there.
No, go ahead and wrap that one up.
I was going to say, as far as troubleshooting, actually, this one's a really interesting use case that I've seen for this page. I had a firm that I was working with, a client of Guardian, who was using this because they recently had a very troublesome family that they found in a project that was causing them a ton of issues. And they were actually able to use this page to go and see which other projects that had been loaded into. So they were able to quickly go and kind of get ahead of people reporting issues in those other projects by tracking that family down using this family loading page, which I thought was really cool. And then properties, again, another example from a call a couple of weeks ago. I was on the phone with somebody who just couldn't figure out how these materials kept getting in their project, being able to see the properties that have been added, being able to see who's modifying and creating new view templates. View templates tend to be a really hot topic on the calls that I'm on. So being able to see those types of modifications and additions to the project, the individual transactions, kind of who did it, and know where you need to go to start to get ahead of it. With crashing, I think we've talked quite a bit about crashing, so won't spend too much time here, but again, just the ability to kind of troubleshoot if someone is coming to you with an issue. You can really dig in here to see exactly who, when, right, the time. Maybe you need to dig into the journal files to really get into the weeds of all the things that happened during that session, or just jump to another page in Guardian. This can help you pinpoint when that happened and what might have caused it. Charlie, anything you wanted to add on troubleshooting before we jump into content?
No, that was great. I think, in fact, if you cruise forward 2 more slides here, Josh, I'll just kind of focus on the properties. This is, when we think about the standards, the data here can be very helpful. And excuse me, this page is really a consolidation. If you were familiar with our previous report, this is really quite improved in my mind. In one place, you're able to see kind of the volume of properties entering your models and kind of which property types those are comprised of. So 18,000 added properties by name have entered the models for this firm. And most of those are line patterns. So you can very easily click on that pie chart and filter down the rest of this to show by name what those properties were and into which projects they went into. Basically, the goal here is to allow you to make scalable decisions. Obviously, I don't hear much about people, oh, there's one property, I'm going to go clean that up in whatever file. I don't think that's really happening. But what I hope is happening here is you're able to see, okay, you click on line patterns, In the bottom right, now we're looking at only line patterns and we're sorting by count. So we're going to see, in the thousands probably, X line pattern was added 2,000 times into my models. That's kind of a problem that's like happening a lot, right? And you'll see those. So I would suspect anybody on the call here that has Guardian could come to this page, pick 10 of these top properties, and they're most likely ones you don't want or need any longer. And you could easily go into Guardian and create a mapping rule for those, and then just wipe it out going forward, because Guardian's always there watching for these properties entering your projects. So that's kind of a creative way to use this data. The whole goal is to employ the mapping engine. But we get questions like, who changed my view template? Who changed the dimension style? Right? This is a place to come, because you can easily sort for that in the top right corner under property search. Just type out that name. We had a company we were talking to say, yeah, it's been the bane of my existence. We keep getting this like medium rare line style showing up, and they have no idea who made it and where it's at. And so this would tell you who made it and where it's at. So kind of a fun story there. I think that's probably the picture, the kind of big picture for the content side. But yeah, the mappings helping you understand how effective Guardian is at cleaning up families, especially those duplicated families with the 1, 2, 3s at the end. That's all going to show up here. And then the approved content sources. Just a plug for this feature. It's all completely rule-based now, so you can get creative here about what families you're allowing into the projects, or for those you're allowing, what kind of messages might be showing up to the users. All right, if it's being loaded from the download folder, I think a great question to ask people is, do you want this in our library? Right, help employ them in the team effort of improving your content library. That's just one kind of idea that comes to mind, but a lot of things you can do here. We had a webinar about content cleanup. Chris led that, the content car wash, he called it, and we really suggest you taking your library and running it through Guardian, cleaning out all these extra things, and then using these rules to kind of have other content be cleaned by Guardian. Okay. Yeah, well, we went through a lot of slides there. Great. Thanks for sticking with us. We kind of, in closing, it's always a good chance to kind of talk about just some announcements and things to be aware of. If you haven't seen it, we did release a 3.2.8 version. This was actually a really good point release for us. That third digit's typically reserved for like hot fix type of improvements, but there's actually some pretty good performance improvements and things like what we're showing here with B. We did update the kind of the navigation, the button positioning and naming of different things. So we did that. It also supports Revit 2026. So that's exciting. And we've talked already about the new backstage template. So we've been at work on 3.3 for some time now. Excited for that. There's some exciting things coming. Kind of opening up the command user command system, so you can essentially add any command in Revit now to this. So we'll just kind of tease that one feature that's coming.